Robert Martin, 2329 London Lane. Mayor Longery, Council Members Jelly, Juneman, Nephew, and Rosbach, I, Robert Martin, stand before this esteemed council as a fellow American and a resident of Maplewood. I question the constitutionality of the resolution suspending Maplewood monthly council columns during the 2009 election campaign season. I am citing the April 24, 2009 opinion of the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, case number 06-51587, in the appeal of Raingraw v. Brown. Circuit Judge Dennis stated that, the First Amendment's protection of elected official speech is full, robust, and analogous to that afforded to citizens in general. Furthermore, when a state seeks to restrict the speech of an elected official on the basis of its content, a federal court must apply strict scrutiny and declare that limitation invalid unless the state carries its burden to prove that the regulation furthers a compelling state interest and that it is narrowly tailored to serve that interest. Strict scrutiny, a formula crafted by the Supreme Court for implementing constitutional values, is one of the most important elements of modern constitutional law. When a state acts as a sovereign rather than as an employer, its power to limit First Amendment freedom is much more attenuated. That is because a state's interest in regulating speech as sovereign is relatively subordinate, as the government cannot restrict speech of the public at large just in the name of efficiency. None of the Supreme Court's public employee speech decisions qualifies or limits the First Amendment's protections of elected government officials' speech. The Supreme Court's decisions demonstrate that the First Amendment's protection of elected official speech is robust and no less strenuous than that afforded to the speech of citizens in general. The court emphasized that the role that elected officials play in our society makes it all the more imperative that they be allowed freely to express themselves on matters of current public importance. An elected official's relationship with the state differs from that of an ordinary state employee. Our employee is an elected official about whom the public is obliged to inform itself, and the employer is the public itself, at least in the practical sense. With the power to hire and fire, it is true that the elected official was an employee of the state. It is equally true that as an elected holder of state office, his relationship with his employer differs from that of an ordinary state employee. These citations referenced are based on analysis of the content of a speech. This resolution removes the opportunity to even make a speech for the content to be scrutinized. When a governing body is debating restricting its own First Amendment rights to the freedom of speech, then the citizenry must entertain the fear that their First Amendment rights will be violated. If the principle of this resolution is equally applied to elected officials who seek re-election to their respective offices, then State Senator Charles Wigger cannot publish and distribute his legislative update and his update newsletter during the campaign period. State Representative Nora Slyward cannot mail her legislative update if she is running for re-election. County Commissioner Victoria Reinhardt cannot distribute any county commissioner information to the public during her re-election campaign. Congresswoman Betty McCollum cannot mail any congressional record material if she runs for re-election. Does this council and the city have the wherewithal and the resources to withstand a constitutional challenge to this resolution, possibly to the United States Supreme Court, over a period of years? Do you want to make the choice to place this incredible burden on city staff and the public to support defending a constitutional challenge monetarily? This council has taken an oath to support the Constitution. If this resolution is passed, it will violate the sacred oath that you have sworn to uphold. 23 years ago, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution as an Air Force officer. My father defended our Constitution as a sailor in the Pacific aboard the battleship New Jersey during World War II. I always thought that I would have to defend human rights in foreign lands, not in my own backyard. For the sake of human dignity and decency, I implore you not to adopt this resolution. Thank you, and have a blessed life.
Thank you very much for your comments. Mr. Nephew, I believe you were next. Did you have some questions?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions, Robert. One is, are you aware that the city of Maplewood regulates signs?
Yes.
Do you have a problem with that?
No, the sign size, but not necessarily the content. So.
Right. Precisely the point. Now, I just want to call your attention to what you read, because you said that the problem was worse because they weren't regulating the content. In our case, this resolution doesn't regulate the content. It is content neutral. It doesn't matter under the terms of this resolution if you intended to write about politics, if you intended to write about religion, if you intended to write about your favorite hobbies, if you intended to write about your favorite pets. It is completely content neutral. It simply says, we will not give this platform for 4 months to members of the city council. So how is that different from saying, we will not give the ability to put up a billboard in the streets, regardless of what the content is? We're not saying we're banning billboards about politics or about hair shampoo or clothing detergent. We're saying, no, we're not going to allow new billboards, or they're only within these various restrictions, not at these times, not in these places, and so forth. So how is it that it's acceptable for the city to regulate the content of non-elected officials, but it would be violating their constitutional rights to, not the content, but the form and the presence of it, but a content-blind regulation of elected officials would be problematic?
Well, my interpretation of the resolution, you have to have content first to even do any type of analysis on it. And content neutrality, that's still a regulation of free speech. I mean, it boils down to even the ability to make any type of speech or express any type of content. The choice is not even given here.
But there are many outlets for it. I mean, it seems to me that the case that you're citing there sounds like it's someone who is perhaps reprimanded or punished because of something they said in an elective capacity, and they were punished through their job because they were an employee of the state. And that's not at all the kind of thing that we're talking about here. I mean, we're talking about whether or not positively to spend public funds on giving access to elected officials for whatever they wish to write about. And you mentioned Senator Uyghur and these other people, and I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but there are a lot of regulations about what exactly can be done and at what times. I mean, there are limitations when it's during a campaign season on the use of government resources on those various things.
Okay.
Even when you're talking about in terms of propriety, I had a conversation with Senator Uyghur about this very resolution. And he pointed out to me that he has a regular column in the Lily News, in the local paper. You know, I don't know what the schedule is, but he periodically writes a column talking about what's going on at the legislature. And they do not give him that column during the campaign season. So actually, it's fairly routine to suspend all sorts of perks of incumbency during the campaign season out of a sense of what is proper and decent. I would like to specifically ask our city attorney, from a constitutional standpoint at first blush, and I should say that I did run this resolution past the city attorney before putting it in the packet to ask him, do you see any issues from a legal or constitutional standpoint? Mr. Cantor, did any such issues arise to you?
Mayor and Council, in fairness to Councilmember Nephew, he did ask me about this before tonight, and in fairness to Mr. Martin, he told me he was going to be here questioning the constitutionality of it based on his interpretation of a Fifth Circuit case. So I kind of knew this was coming, so to speak. And, you know, to give you some comfort, Mr. Martin, this is a taxpayer-driven vehicle, correct? The city newsletter.
Right.
And I think the restriction is just seeking to not make that taxpayer-driven newsletter available to any contestant as an open mic, because that's essentially what it is. And that restriction goes away once the election concludes. And as long as it is content neutral, I mean, this is not restricting incumbents, this is not restricting anybody, it's restricting everybody. There's a difference between restricting something on principle and restricting something on your principles. And this is something restricting something on principle. It's an across-the-board deal, and I think that's what distinguishes it. I think the initial request, if you will, by the petition was to actually only restrict those council members who are actually running for election or re-election. I guess in this case it would be only re-election, but that would be a problem, of course, because why? Then you would be able to write about your favorite candidate if you weren't running for re-election. So that would be a content-based, or at least it would be segregating out a population up here that's not going to be able to write, and it's only because they're running for re-election that they're not able to write. And that I would deem probably inappropriate and unconstitutional as a restriction, because you're making that form available to some but not others. In this case, the council is considering whether or not to restrict themselves completely. And I think that's where the difference is, and I think that's perfectly adequate. You know, we don't allow political advertising in our city parks for that reason, and that's an across the board, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question. But.
Yeah, and the one other thing that I wanted to add on that is that precisely the point that you bring up about regulating the content of speech of elected officials, if we went with the idea of saying, well, we'll just set a rule that nobody can write any campaign topics, nobody can use the newsletter for campaigning, then we actually are going in and regulating the content of the speech. We're saying you can go ahead and write, but we're going to have to censor what you say to make sure it meets the standards that we will deem appropriate. That becomes much more constitutionally problematic than simply saying we're just none of us going to touch it, doesn't matter what you were planning to write about. It's just there won't be anything there.
Well, the premise is a restriction is being placed on elected officials.
We're placing them on ourselves.
Well, well, majority vote. There may be those there who do not agree with this. So, but if they don't agree with this, that restriction is being placed upon them.
They're placing it for their political advantage is what they're doing.
Well,
To be honest.
Well, Councilman Jelly, I'm not looking at the political advantages or disadvantages. I'm just looking at
That's what they're
one
doing.
simple thing. Do the folks have the right to free speech? Yes, it's a government publication. Government resources are used to do that. So, on the same premise, if a council member wants to write a letter and use postage paid for by the city to send it out to the public during the election season, does that same principle apply according to this resolution? There, you're restricting their another avenue is restricting their free speech.
Wait, are you saying that we would allow somebody running for office who is an incumbent to send a letter to the public at city expense?
Instead of putting what they have to say in their column in the newsletter, what if a city councilman wants to send a letter out discussing matters of public information?
If they're
in the letter?
using their own money or their campaign funds to do it, that's just
No, I
fine.
mean not a campaign letter, just
You're
public
saying
information.
use the city funds to do that.
If they want, yes, not a campaign, a regular column, no campaign information. If they want to send it distributed between the months of July and November,
What
it's
if,
the same. Is it the same principle as using the city newsletter? So you're saying
Yes.
don't use any city funds to communicate with the public.
No, I'm not saying that. This resolution specifically addresses the city newsletter because that's an established policy. I don't think what you're describing is currently an established policy, and if somebody came out and said, I'd like to send a letter to everybody in Maplewood at taxpayer expense to talk about something that I promise is completely not related to the campaign in the middle of campaign season, I would have a big problem with it, and I think the state auditor would have a really big problem with it too.
So you're saying in the past, no city council has ever sent any correspondence
I'm
to the
not
city.
saying that. I'm just saying that the way that you're setting it up, which is a hypothetical, seems a little bit. I'm kind of incredulous about it.
Well, I'm just saying, has any city councilman ever sent out any information to the public through the city resources?
I bet not.
During a campaign season?
No, I mean, period.
Well, period.
Ooh,
Anytime.
I haven't, what have I sent out?
notices.
A notice that we're having a meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah. But, no, wait, let's see. I did that with my own money. I didn't use any city funds.
Yeah, I mean, if it's city funds, it has to be approved by the council, or it has to go through the city manager within their budgetary authority. And I can't think of anything in my mind where nothing but a letter from a member of the council was sent at taxpayer expense to everybody in the city. And I think that would be somewhat remarkable if someone were to do that.
That's polite.
Well, I mean, and any communication, for example, you take that same letter, you post it on the city's website. Can a council member post a letter to the public on the city's website? It's using city resources.
That's been done. You
That
had
was
yours,
done.
you had yours on,
So did Diana.
Diana had one on. That's been
Yeah.
done.
So
Again,
that would
outside
be,
of campaign season and with
No,
particular-
Yes, they were taken off during campaign season.
Yours is up for 2.5 years. They just didn't take it off until we redid the website. And it wasn't you, it just they forgot to take it off. It was up there for 2.5 years, man.
Yeah, it got to be an old letter.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't relevant anymore, but they never took it off, so it was up during at least one election cycle. So,
Mr. Cantrud, did you happen to pull up this, I think the same issue actually came up with Mayor Ryback in 2005. Did you pull up that advisory opinion from their ethics board in Minneapolis?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
I seem to recall in that case, didn't he refund the cost of the mailing?
It was determined that he didn't have to. At least, I don't know.
No, he gave the money
He
back.
gave the money back, though.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. I guess you can read what the opinion said. I just saw it briefly. I don't know anything about it.
So, first time,
So, Ms.
I don't know
June-
why we want to kick this around. I
Okay,
mean,
well-
I don't want to write, Kathy doesn't want to write.
Ms. Juniman, okay, that's her comment. Now, Mr. Jelly,
No, that
did you have
wasn't
a
my
comment?
comment, but whatever.
go ahead.
Okay, well, go ahead then.
I had a question for Rob.
Okay, go ahead.
Can you tell me what the basis of that case was that you were referring to?
the basis of the case was
What started it all?
in Texas, in Alpine City, a couple of city councilmen basically had private emails that were perceived to be an infraction of the Texas open meeting law. And the district attorney brought suit against them, and the case was ultimately dismissed.
Okay.
But the city-
Okay, that's why that's why I asked. To me, that's a horse of a different color, okay?
Well, this opinion was not
so
based on
this
that.
is, in my opinion, this is bending that to try and make this look like that. All I have to say is my comments up here have nothing to do with anything like that, and they have everything to do with what I said before. I just think it's totally better for everyone if you're on the ballot not to be writing anything that therefore anybody could read something into. It doesn't matter who it is or what we might say. It's just better if we don't. That's my only opinion on the whole thing. And if I don't want to say anything, I don't have to. That's the whole point.